Hello, my name is Antonio Martinez and I belong to the Camille Research Group from the Department of Applied Linguistics at the Universidad Politécnica de Valencia. I would like to talk to you about the Cambridge First Certificate in English, Paper 2, Listening, by paying special attention to Part 2, which is called Sentence Completion. Here, you as a candidate will have to hear one or more speakers and then you'll have to complete the sentences provided by using a word or words from the recording. Bear in mind that these sentences are in the same order as the information that you will hear. You will be allowed to hear the recording twice, so that you can have a second chance to complete and check your answers. Some pieces of advice. We recommend you to try to fill in as many gaps as possible by the first time you listen to the audio file. You'll have to use between 1 and 3 words, and you will not be allowed to modify any of the words provided. If you cannot fill any of the gaps, you should go ahead to the following one as soon as possible, so not to waste time. As an introduction to the topic included in the exercise that we are going to present, we can find risk management. The monologue that we are about to listen to shows how important it is to discuss and think about risk management when you are part of a company or business activity. Managers attach much importance to this issue, as in most cases their success or the correct running of their companies depend on forecasting properly how their economy or their economical activity is going to progress. We can ask ourselves about some of these issues: catastrophic failure, strategic failure, operational failure. Business is presented as a spider's web. This is as an organizing body at the center with other interlocking strands of resources. And this is the exercise as you will find it in the official examination. Paper 4, Part 4, Exercise 1, Sentence Completion. You will hear an extract dealing with risk management. First, read through the sentences below and try to understand the main areas covered. Then, complete the gaps with the exact words used in the recording. These are the sentences that we have to complete. Risk management has started to be taken a lot more seriously by. Remember the analogy? As well as looking at the web as a whole, it's important to look at the strands, at each strand individually and at how they. We've got a catastrophic failure, etc. Then we've got a strategic failure, and that's what happens when the company fails. And then there's operational failure, when a company simply delivers the. Each of the 4 sections shows a different risk perspective. At the top, we have the perspective. At the bottom, we have the innovation and learning risk perspective. We'll start with the top. Financial risk perspective. This can be broken down to include things like the cost of a. If the sum is smaller, then the risk factor is lower and the company's finances look a lot. Let's move down to the bottom section. Innovation and learning risk perspective. This includes things like the percentage of a company has. Over to the right, we have the internal business risk perspective. Here you find things like the percentage of who leave the company. Finally, on the left, in the customer risk perspective, we've got things like the percentage of. And then we can hear the monologue.
We can see that risk management has started to be taken a lot more seriously by big companies. There's still a long way to go, but things are happening. Experts tell us that a holistic approach to risk management is the most effective. Why? Because only by looking at the whole picture can we assess every possible aspect. Risk management is complex. Remember the spider's web analogy? As well as looking at the web as a whole, it's important to look at the strands, at each strand individually and how they interconnect. To remind you of the 3 main risk types, let's have a look at this diagram. Okay, we've got catastrophic failure, wars, terrorism, etc. Then we've got strategic failure. That's what happens when the company's business strategy fails. For example, when a marketing strategy hasn't taken into account some important detail. And then there's operational failure, when a company simply can't deliver the promised goods. Now let's move on and look at just how these strands of the spider's web are interlinked. This is a diagram of an enterprise risk scorecard. The scorecard is a circle divided into 4 equal sections. Each of the 4 sections shows a different risk perspective. At the top, we have the financial risk perspective. At the bottom, we have the innovation and learning risk perspective. On the right is the internal business risk perspective, and last but not least, on the left, the customer risk perspective. Let's look at each section in a bit more detail. We'll start with the top, financial risk perspective. This can be broken down to include things like the cost of a company's debt. The difference between paying 0.5% interest on a large debt can mean the difference between a company surviving or collapsing. Another aspect that can be included in a company's financial risk perspective is tax. More specifically, the difference between the amount of tax a company expects to pay and the actual amount it pays. Obviously, if the sum is more than expected, then all of the company's finances have to be readjusted. If the sum is smaller, then the risk factor is lower and the company's finances look a lot healthier. Let's move down to the bottom section. Innovation and learning risk perspective. This includes things like the percentage of trained employees a company has. Training costs money, but trained employees increase productivity. All of these issues need to be included in the company's risk strategy. Another aspect in this section is the difference between a company's expected growth and its actual growth. Like the tax question, the size of that difference, and whether the actual growth is more or less than what was expected will have major repercussions. Over to the right, we have the internal business risk perspective. Here you find things like the percentage of top performers who leave the company. This is difficult to predict, but companies should play safe and add these things into the equation. If a top businessman gets an interesting offer from a competitor, it's only natural that he or she will go over to the other side. Other internal issues might be unsatisfactory internal audit findings or the price of insurance. It's always worth shopping around for better deals. Finally, on the left, in the customer risk perspective, we've got things like the percentage of satisfied customers, and on the other hand, the number of customer complaints, or the number of new competitors coming into the market, and directly linked to this, the percentage of the market that the company loses as a result. Risk management is certainly a complex issue.
Okay, so once we finish, we hear it for the second time and go back to the first sentences that we have to complete. We tried to fill in the gaps of these sentences, and we provide you with the answer key for the first 3 options. Risk management has started to be taken a lot more seriously by big companies. Remember the spider's web analogy? As well as looking at the web as a whole, it's important to look at the strands, at each strand individually, and at how they interconnect. Now we recommend you to go on and fill in the rest of sentences from 4 to 12. Thank you very much.